Using project expense policies, you can create permissions or restrictions for the types and amounts of expenses the workers can submit through an expense report. You can decide to warn workers that an expense report exceeds a specific maximum amount, but accept the submission. You can also prevent expense reports that exceed a specific amount from being submitted. Expense policies can be very general or very specific. For example, you can have one policy that applies to all workers who are assigned to a particular project contract for the duration of the contract. You could also have a very specific policy that applies to a single worker or a single day in a particular city. Let's talk about the components of an expense report. Before I start talking about the components of a project expense policy, I just want to clarify a couple things. A project expense policy is only applicable to project expenses that are submitted through an expense report. It doesn't work with the project expense journal or the other options to enter project expenses. And the secondary thing is it's not the same thing as the expense policy functionality that lays in the expense management module. There's something called an expense policy that's very, very similar to this functionality that we're going to be talking about here. That is in the expense management module, but just keep in mind they're different pieces of functionality. So going back to a project expense policy, there's two primary setup components. One of them is called the project expense policy worker group, and all it is a group of workers. So you can see in the form below, on the very left side, we added a group called sales. And then on the right, bottom right side, you have two panes. You have the selected worker pane and the remaining workers. And all you do is take workers out of the remaining worker field and add them to the selected. When they're in the selected side, that means they're part of the group. All right, and this is an optional piece of setup. You don't even have to configure this if you don't want to. The second piece of setup is you actually go define your project expense policies using the project expense policy form. And this is what it looks like. I had to zoom out a little bit to get the whole form in, so it's kind of small there. But I'm not going to talk about every field. I'll just give you the high-level overview here. Basically, you can create a line for any category that you want. So in the example below, we have a policy around the expense category of meals, and you can define those lines at a specific policy type, whether it's at a company level or a customer level. If you do customer, then you can get down to what specific customer, what specific contract, what project. If you do company, you don't define a customer, project, or project contract. You just define what workers it applies to, whether it's a group of workers, specific worker, and then you can define what cities it's applicable to. And then after that, all you're doing is defining the rules around the policy, which is what you allow. It's basically you can throw a warning if you're above a certain amount, and you can throw a hard stop if you're above it's called the maximum amount. And then there's require receipt that you can also do, and then there's a receipt minimum. So if you're over a specific amount, then you have to provide a receipt as well. So we'll get in and demonstrate that here right now. So with our demonstration, we'll go ahead and take a look at the policy worker group form and just create a quick one just so you can see that. And then we'll go in and define a new expense policy for the flights category. All right, so we're going to go through and create a project expense policy. And to do so, you're going to be under the project management and accounting module under setup and then the policies folder. There's two menu items in here that relate to project expense policy. There's the project expense policy menu item, and that's where you go define your rules. And then the project expense policy worker groups, that's where you create your worker groups that you can apply to each rule. So let's just create a quick group. So we'll go in here and we'll just create a new one, and we'll say that it's for our IT department. And we'll just select some workers. I want to make sure I have Julia in here. So then we'll add those to the left pane. Basically, they're the selected workers, meaning they're part of our IT group. So, I mean, pretty straightforward setup there. Create a group, add the workers that you want to that group. All right, so now if you're at the point of creating expense policies, you can basically go to Project Management and Accounting, Setup, Policies, Project Expense Policies. It's going to bring you into a form, or this form that you're seeing right now. and you can put it in edit mode to edit any of your existing. But basically, right now I have a policy out there, and let's apply it to our IT staff. But we have a policy for meals, and basically what it's telling us is that the allowed amount, or the max amount, I guess, is $50, and then there's another field called maximum amount is 75. So basically what happens is if you have and it's per unit of an expense, so per expense, meaning per line, or you can run it per day or per report. But basically it's saying that if your meal expense is over $50, you're going to get a warning, and the maximum amount is $75. If you go over $75, you're going to get a hard stop. So allowable amount is your warning amount, max amount is your max amount. All right, so that's a little confusing when you look at this. And then the per unit, just note that you can do it at a line level, so meaning the expense level, or you can do it per day, per expense report, or you can do it at an entire report level as well. Okay. All right, so let's add our line for the flight policy that we're going to put in place. So when we go ahead and do so, the first field that you're going to run across is the policy type. So you can do this at a customer level or a company level. So if I pick customer, you'll notice that now the customer account is active. You have to populate a customer. If you do so, then both these fields will come into play, the contract ID. So then you can pick a contract, and then you can pick a project if you want to get down to that granularity. If you're not worried about the customer account, the contract, the project, etc., you can go to a company level, and if you do so, customer, project, and project contract are irrelevant. So then you can define your start and end date. So we'll just start at 1/16 to 12/31, and for this one, now since we're at a policy type of company, basically you get to define either the specific worker or city that this policy line is applicable towards, worker, city, and the city is just your zip code, so you pick the zip codes. And then the project expense policy worker group, if you want to do a group of workers, you can pick it. So let's just pick our IT department, because we know I added Julia Funderburg to that. Expense category, so you can see that's a required field, so all your lines have to be at the category level. So let's go pick flights. There it is. And then you can define the currency, which we'll say is USD. And now this is where you can put your warning amount. Any expense for flights over the allowable amount will receive a warning. So we'll say that if you're over $1,000, you get a warning, and we'll just do that per flight, so per line. And you can require a receipt. I'm not going to do so. And you can actually fill in this receipt minimum. So if it's over a specific amount that you define here, you require a receipt. So I could put $500, and then if you put a $700 flight in there, a receipt would be required. Max percent, you don't even have to work with this field if you don't want to, but it's basically a way to bump up the max amount field by a specific percent. So if I put 20% in here, max amount would go to 1,200. If you adjust the maximum amount field, if I put this to 1,500, you can see the max percent field automatically adjusts. So right now, we just created a policy rule for flights that will give a warning if you're over $1,000 and a hard stop if you're over $1,500. So let's go test it. We'll look at the meals as well. So I have an expense report up in the background, so we'll go to that. And basically, we'll just add a new expense. We'll say it's for flights, and then we'll say the transaction date is, we'll just put a T for today, and we'll say a $1,200 expense on any project, and we'll go ahead and save. And you can see once I save that, we get a error or a warning. So the amount 1,200 exceeds for flight exceeds the allowed amount of 1,000. So it's only a warning here, and you can see I've been doing this a little bit in the background. But what happens if you go over the $1,500 amount, and right now this would let us submit it, no problem. But if I did 1,600, you can see that we get a hard stop. So so the amount, so it's an X now, not the warning sign. the amount of 1,600 entered for the flight exceeds the allowed amount of the $1,000 per expense. So we're over the max. So I mean, this demonstrates the policy functionality. You can either have it throw a warning or an error. But basically all you have to do is go define these expense rules in the expense form and set up your different worker groups if you want to go to that level, and then you can configure all your different expenses. And just to note, I'll, I guess, reiterate that this is different from the actual policy functionality in the expense management module. So if you go to expense management under setup, there's policies here, and there's an expense report policy. And basically here you can do pretty much the same type stuff, but you actually build out if-then conditions. I'll just show you real quick. So let's just look at an expense policy. And let's say, yeah, they have some rules for air rental and car rental. Let's just look at airline and car rental. We'll just take a look at it. So basically what happens here is if you put a flight on there and you actually have a business class flight that you booked, you have to provide a justification as to why you picked business class instead of economy. So you can build out the rules in a little more granularity by building the condition right here. So you can use either or, but the project expense rules are pretty simplistic. So if that's the route you want to go, you can use the project expense policies.